What's up everyone? In today's video we are going to be implementing saving and unsaving properties, and we will also be doing some refactoring. So to get started, head to your server and go to the user model. In this model we're going to add a new field. It's going to be a JSON field, and it's going to represent our saved properties. And in this field it's going to be an array of the property IDs which the user likes. So let's go ahead and import the data types from GORM, and let's go to our user route so that we can add a new function. So here in our user route, let's first change what we are returning to the user whenever they log in or register. So here we want to return the saved properties field whenever we are returning a user and register, login, or any other function. So let's do that. Here I'm just going to copy this and add it to any other place where we're sending back the user to the user. Alright, so that looks good. Next, let's add a new data structure. We're going to call this alter saved properties input, and it's going to have these different fields. And next, let's create a helper function underneath hash insult password. This will be to get a user by their ID, and it will return a pointer to the user. So we're going to get the user from our database, and if we get an error during the query, we're just going to return an internal server error. Otherwise, if the user is not found, we'll send back a 404 with not found. Otherwise, we've got the user, so let's send back the address to that user. Now let's create a function to get the saved properties of a user. So I'm just going to do that underneath reset password. Here, let's declare that function. Then we're going to get the ID from the parameters, and then we'll get our user. And if user is nil, we'll just return. Otherwise, we need to get the saved properties of the user. And if we get an error during that, we're just going to send an internal server error. Otherwise, we will just send back those properties. And next, let's create a function to save or unsave properties. I'm going to put that underneath this one. We'll call this alter user saved properties, and we're going to do the same thing, getting the ID from the path parameters, and then we'll get our user based upon that ID. Next, we need to make sure that the request body is valid, and if it isn't, we need to send back the validation errors. Now, based upon the property ID within the request body, we need to get the property and its associations. And now we need to see if user saved properties is nil or not. If the saved properties are not nil, then we need to unmarshal the saved properties of the user into this slice, unmarshaled properties. And really, this is going to be a list of property IDs. And if we get an error during that, we'll send back an internal server error. And if the operation is to add, then we need to first see if the slice of unmarshaled properties contains the new property ID. And if it doesn't, then we need to append that property ID. Otherwise, our saved properties are just going to be equal to what we already have for the unmarshaled properties. And if the operation is to remove and the length of the unmarshaled properties is greater than 0, then we'll just filter the unmarshaled properties so that they don't contain the passed in property ID. And then at the end here, we need to marshal that back to JSON. And if we get an error during that process, we'll send out an internal server error. We'll save those marshaled properties to the user, and then we will send a status code of 204 back to the user. And now we just need to add some of these packages. So I'm going to open up the terminal, go get, and we also imported string convert, and for some reason we are getting this error. So I'm just going to get this package. All right, so that seemed to work. Let's go into main.go and add these new functions. We will add them under the user party. And we're going to have one, which is just going to be a get endpoint, and we'll point to get user saved properties. And then we'll have a patch endpoint to alter the user saved properties. Now with that done, let's start up our server and navigate to our application code. All right, so here in my application code, I'm going to go to my constants file, and we're going to need to add some new endpoints. So what I'm going to first do is create a new variable, which will be a function, really. And it's going to be called saved endpoint, and it will take in an ID and return this string. And within the endpoints object, I'm going to create two new endpoints for getting saved properties by user ID and altering saved properties by user ID. And then down below that, I'm going to create a new object which will hold query keys. So right now we're going to have search properties, selected properties, and saved properties. So let's go search for any place that we are using search properties as a query key and change it with query keys.searchProperty. And it looks like we were only using it in map and search screen. So now let's go and search for the places we are using selected property. And we're using it in property details screen. And we're also using it in the review screen. All right, so with that done, let's go to the user type and make a change there. Here we're going to want to add the field saved properties, which will be a number array. And now let's go into the property type. Here let's add the field liked to our property type. With that done, let's go to the useAuth file and add a new function. This function will set the user's saved properties locally, and we're going to want to export this along with these other functions. So with that done, let's go create some new queries and a new mutation. So I'm going to go and do that in the hooks folder. I'm going to create a new folder for mutations, and I'm going to call this use save property mutations, or mutation. Within this file, we'll be adding these different imports, and we'll create a function to make a patch request to alter a user's saved properties. And down beneath that, we will export use saved property mutation, and in that we'll get the user and the query client. Beneath that, we will return use mutation, which should take in a property ID and op, which will either be add or remove, and then we will call our save or unsaved property function. And we'll also need to add some options to this mutation. So onMutate will be an asynchronous function, and we're going to need to get the passed in variables. We'll cancel our queries for saved properties, search properties, and selected properties, and we'll get the data for those three queries as well. If the previously selected property ID is equal to the current property ID that was passed in, then we'll set the like value of that previous selected property to the opposite of what it was, and then we'll set the selected property data to that new property. If the operation was removed and we have the previously saved properties, then we will filter those properties so that they don't contain the property with the passed in property ID, and then we will set saved properties to the new saved properties. And if we have previously searched properties, then we will search for the property within that has the passed in ID and set liked equal to false. Now if it was add, then we need to go through our previously searched properties and set liked equal to true, where the property ID is equal to the passed in ID. Outside that logic, we will set the search properties to the previously searched properties. And down below, we will return the previously saved properties, previously searched properties, and previous selected properties. On error, we will just set the data back to what it was. And on settled, we will invalidate queries for saved properties and searched properties. So with that done, let's go and add our new queries. So I'm going to create a new folder called queries. And I'm going to do that in hooks. Here I'm going to create a new file called use saved properties query. We will have these different imports. Then we'll create a function to fetch a user's saved properties based upon the passed in user ID. And then we will export our function use saved properties query, and within that we'll get the user and then return use query. The query key is going to be saved properties, and we will be calling fetch properties, which we just created, passing in the user ID, and we'll set retry to false. Next, we're going to create a new query for searching for properties. So use search properties query. We'll have these different imports, and we'll create a function to fetch properties based upon a passed in bounding box. Then we'll create the use search properties query, which will take in a bounding box, and then we'll get our query info, and then we'll transform the data if we have it. And for every property which the user has liked, we need to set liked to true, and if it wasn't liked, we'll set liked to false. And here at the end, we need to return the query info and the data in an object. Next, let's create another query called use selected property query. We'll have these imports. We'll create a function to get a property based upon a property ID. And then we will do the same type of transformation to the query info, where if the user has liked a certain property, we'll set that property.liked to true. All right, so now we need to go and implement these queries. So one place that we can do that is within map.tsx. So I'm going to go there first, and here we can just import use search properties query, and we can get rid of this use query statement and call use search properties query. And we will pass in the bounding box. Next, let's go to the search screen. Here we'll also import use search properties query, and above this search properties variable, let's create our bounding box, and then we can replace use query here with a call to use search properties query, passing in the bounding box we just created. Now let's go down here. We will no longer have this nested data, so let's just change that. And here we won't have this. So we'll have to check if we have data first, and if we do, then we will pass that data in. Otherwise, we'll pass in an empty array. And here we can get rid of data, this second data value. And same thing here. Now let's go to the saved screen. And we can change liked properties here. We're not going to need this anymore, so I'm just going to delete it. I'm going to create a new variable called saved properties, and it's going to call our saved properties query. And if that is loading, then I'm just going to return a loading component. So we'll do that above get body text, and we'll import loading. And now where we were once using liked properties, we should now use saved properties.data. So let's go search for where we were using that. And here it is. So I'm going to replace this so that we are now using saved properties.data. And I'm going to add in some extra code. I'm going to put it above the get button appearance function. And pretty much it's going to call saved properties.refetch if all of these conditions are true. And the reason that I'm adding this is because if a user logs out and then logs back in, this page won't automatically update. I still haven't figured out why, but this is a short-term solution to that. So that's why I'm adding it. All right, now let's navigate to the property details screen. Here we'll import useSelectedProperty query. Here we'll change this, so we're calling that useSelectedProperty hook, passing in the property ID from the root.params. And here, if we don't have property.data, then we will just return unable to get property. And then we'll change this to property.data. Now let's go into the property header section. Here we'll add imports for useAuth and useSavedProperty mutation. We'll get rid of this state variable and replace that with user setSavedProperties and the SavedProperty mutation. Now let's go down to our material community icon, and if property.liked is true, then this needs to be heart. Otherwise it can be heart outline, and I messed that up, but it's all right. Now we need to change handle heart press. So if the user isn't signed in, we'll return that they need to sign in or sign up. Otherwise, we will alter their saved properties and then mutate their saved properties. And to alter their saved properties, it will depend on add or remove. If it's add, then we need to add the property ID to their saved properties array. If it's remove, we'll remove it. So that should work for the property header section. Now we need to go to the card information component and change some things there. So we will import useAuth and useSavedProperty mutation, and we're pretty much going to be doing the same thing because this component also contains that heart. Next, we'll get the user setSavedProperties and SavedProperty, and we will just use the same functions that we used in the other component. And you could argue that we could put this all into one single heart component, and maybe I will in a later video. But for right now, this works, so I'm going to go with it. Next, I'm going to add in pressable from React Native. Next, we need to go and change our heart icon. So right here, we will wrap this in a pressable component. On press, we'll call our handle heart press function, and the icon will depend on property.liked. Now we just need to create the heart container style, and that will have these different fields of padding horizontal 10, padding top 10, and padding bottom of 5. So with that done, let's give this a test. Let's go here, see that I have some saved properties from the past. Let's get rid of some of these. And we'll go into this one, and there you can see if we tap on that, it should no longer be in saved properties, and it no longer is, so that's working. We'll go here, and we'll search for some properties, and here, okay, I don't know why that's saved, probably just from some testing, but yeah, let's go to Vegas, we'll save this, and here we can see that. We'll unsave, it's gone there. We go back here, it's gone there. We go into here, it's gone there. So here we can save within the list. I just added 3 there. We can see that. And then if we go over to saved, we have these here. If we unsave over here, it'll unsave on the other side. So now we only have 2, and that seems to be working. So now let's just add in another, let's go to Italy. I have one there. And our search functionality works, so the query to search worked. And we can save that, and it will be saved over here. So now let's log out, and then log back in. And if we go to the saved, we are not seeing it. All right, so the reason that we're getting that error is because we were only checking if saved properties.data does not exist, but if we have an empty array, then this is no longer true. So we'll check or the data length is equal to 0, and it should now work as expected. So I'm going to sign in and test that for you. And here we are getting what we expect. So for the first example, I'm just going to create a new mutation for creating a property. So I'll call this use create property mutation. And then we will go to where we are creating a property. So we'll search up use mutation. And then here in the add property section, we will go here. We can just copy this mutation and then paste it over in use create property mutation. Let's create the hook right now. And then we will return use mutation within that. Let's import use mutation. We're gonna have to import property, Axios, endpoints, query client, and then we'll have to import stack actions and use navigation, as well as query client, or use query client. And then within this hook, we need to create the query client, or rather get the query client and dispatch from use navigation. Here we can just say dispatch, and then we'll create this as its own separate function. So above this, we'll create the function create property, and then here we will get rid of this mutation key, and we'll just call create property. And now we'll have to replace this with a query key, or rather we'll have to add this as a query key and then replace it. So let's go copy that. We'll go to our constants, add this as a query key. So my properties. And I'm going to make this camel case now. And now let's go back to the mutation we were just in. And we will now need to add that as the key here. So query keys dot my properties. And now we just need to add the create property type from property, and we should be good. And now we need to go find any references where we use my properties as a query key. So my properties. And it looks like we use that in add property section. So that will now be query keys dot my properties. And it will be the same thing in all of these other cases. So this is in edit property screen. Same thing in card. Same thing in manage unit screen. And last is in my property screen. Now let's go back to the add property section. And instead of this mutation, we can now call our use create property mutation hook. So we will do that. Now we no longer need query client or navigation. So for the rest of the mutations and queries, that is what I'm going to be doing. Another big refactor that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to rename useAuth here to useUser, and then I'll create another hook which will be called useAuth, and that will actually log in, register, and use Facebook login register, Google OAuth, and Apple OAuth to log in a user. And then reset password will also be within that hook. So first, let's go into use auth and change this to use user. So this will no longer be use auth. It will be use user. And I'm going to rename the file. So now I just need to go and find every instance of use auth and change it to use user. So here, let's search for use auth, and then we can press on this arrow and replace that with use user. And here we can press this button to replace all. Alright, with that done, let's go create a different hook called use auth. These are going to be our non-local imports. These will be our local imports. Here we are going to export const use auth. Let's go to our sign up screen. Here we have Google prompt async and Facebook prompt async. Let's cut those and paste them in use auth. Then we'll get login, go back, and set loading from these different hooks. We'll create a function called handle sign in user, and we'll create another function to handle auth errors. Then we'll create a function for natively registering a user. We'll create another one for native login. Then we'll create one for Facebook auth, another for Google auth, and a final one for Apple auth. Now we'll return native register, native login, and the auth functions. Now let's navigate to the sign in screen. And we can get rid of all this stuff. And we just need native login, Facebook auth, Google auth, and Apple auth from use auth. Here on submit needs to be asynchronous, and we'll just await native login, passing in the values. Now we can go to the Facebook, Google, and Apple buttons, and we just need to await each respective auth function. And now we can get rid of all these different imports. Now let's go to sign up screen. We can do the same thing here, getting rid of all these different mutations. And we can get rid of navigation as well. Now for handle submit, we just await native register, passing in the values. And for the Google, Facebook, and Apple button, we will just await each respective auth function there as well. Now I'm going to go into the user service. So here in services, I'm going to go to this user file, and down at the bottom, I'm going to create a new function, rather two new functions for forgot password and also registering a new password. So here's what forgot password looks like. We already did this in a mutation previously. And here is what resetting a password will look like. And also for all these different functions, I'm just going to return the data at the end and not check if it's present. If it isn't present, then we'll just return undefined, and we're already handling an error, so I don't see why that would be invalid. So that's why we're doing it. Now let's go to the forgot password screen. And here we can get rid of this forgot password mutation. We'll now import use loading and forgot password. And we'll get the set loading function from use loading. Then we'll create the handle submit function. And for our format component on submit, we'll now just pass a reference to handle submit. All right, now let's navigate to the reset password screen. Here we'll import use loading and reset password. And here we can replace navigation with just the navigate function from use navigation, and then we'll get set loading from use loading. We can get rid of this reset password mutation as well as this if statement, and we'll create our handle submit function. And let's go change on submit to pass in handle submit. All right, so with that done, let's just go and remove some of these imports. And there's really only two other things that I should mention before I'm just going to speed run through replacing use queries and use mutations. So the first thing is going to be in use user. So one functionality we want is if a user has searched for properties in an area and they aren't logged in, but then they log in and they have liked properties in that area, we want to show that they have those liked properties. So we would need to do that within this login function in use user. And here I'm just going to remove refetch queries, and I'm going to replace that with this logic. So here I'm going to import our query keys property, and that's all we need. So that's what this code does. So here is an example of that. So we will sign out. We'll go over here and search for some properties. Search the area, we'll see a list, and none of these are liked because we aren't logged in. But if we go and sign in, and we sign in as an account which has liked properties, then we would expect those properties to be liked, or at least show us the properties which we liked. So here we'll see that we have 3 liked properties. Now here we should have 3 liked properties, and there you can see we have them. So that's the type of functionality that we want. But if you don't add this in your code, you aren't going to get that. So I'm still looking for a better way to do that, but this works as a workaround for now. And then another issue that I noticed is if you go up and then you log out. So you see that this map area and that header is hidden. If you log out and you try and go back, then you can't really access it because it's hidden. So what we need to do is go into our animated list header component. And here we're only going to want to have this if the available properties exists and map shown is false. Otherwise, we want to just have it as 0, 0. And we're going to do the same thing down below. So now we'll do the same thing, and it should work a lot better this time. So we'll sign out, and we'll go back, and here we see that we have a map area. Now the user can search, and if they go back, they'll get a little glitch there. I haven't found a way to fix that, but this will give us the functionality that we want, and it will still allow the user to search for properties and view the list. So with that done, I am now going to create the rest of the mutation and query hooks. So I'll go into constants, and I'm going to add in edit property and apartments. So now I'm just going to go and create those mutations and queries. And here we'll add this to manage unit screen. Apartments will now be equal to use apartments query, passing in the route.params.propertyID. And we'll change apartment data here. Now let's go create the edit apartments mutation. Now I'll go back to manage unit screen and change out this mutation. Now let's go to the handle submit, and we will just change edit apartments.mutate to pass in the object and the property ID. And now we can get rid of these unused hooks. Now let's create the query for editing properties. Now we'll go to the edit property screen. And we can change this use query so that it now we'll call the use edit property query hook. And now let's go create this mutation for edit property. Looks like we need to go and create the edit property object type, and that should be in the bottom here. Yep, so we'll just go and add that to our property types. And we're going to want to export it. Now let's go back to our hook. So use edit property mutation. Now let's go back to edit property screen. We can change this out with just calling the use edit property mutation hook. Get rid of this. And I'm going to move this up here. Now down below, we will have to import the edit property object type, and for edit property.mutate, we will need to pass in the object and our property ID. Now we can go and create a mutation for reviews. So we'll call that use create review mutation. And it looks like we need to go into the review screen. And let's go add this to the review types. Now let's go back to the mutation. And we'll go back to the review screen. We'll import use create review mutation. And here for create review, we can just call that hook. Now down in the handle submit, we just need to change the mutate. And we just have one more mutation to create now. It will be for deleting properties. So call it use delete property mutation. Now we just need to go into our card component and we'll call that here. So first let's import, and we can change out use mutation. And here we just need to change mutate, passing in the property ID. And we can get rid of set loading and query client. Now we just need to create one more query called use my properties query. And now we just need to go to the my properties screen. And here for properties, we'll change this out to just call use my properties query. And here we will change this so that it is only going to return loading if properties is loading. Now let's change data. And we'll change it down here as well. So guys, that is going to be it for this one. In the next video, we'll be implementing chat into the app, so stay tuned for that. And if you got to this point in the video, thank you very much for watching, and have a nice day.